Great. Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening for this virtual meeting about solid waste management in the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service area. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to introduce myself and orient everyone to our online meeting space. My name is Katie Hamilton with Tavola Strategy Group, and I'll be facilitating the session this evening, hopefully making the dialogue a bit more seamless for our team of representatives from CSWM. I'd like to introduce to you Sarah Willey, the Manager of Solid Waste Planning and Policy Development, as well as Vivian Shaw, the Senior Manager of Solid Waste Services. These two will provide us an overview of the solid waste management system, the draft guiding principles and goals for the future, and are available to answer your questions and seek feedback this evening. We are also joined by Ingrid Sly with CVRD, who is providing technical support for our online experience this evening. Sarah, did you want to? There we go. Thank you so much. So before we proceed tonight, I'd like to acknowledge that the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service area is located in the Coast Salish, Kwakwaka'wakw, and New-Chad North territories. Both important partners in land management and conservation in the Comox Valley and Strathcona regional districts. My office is located on the traditional Lekwungen territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt people in View Royal. In terms of tonight's agenda, this evening's session will be about 2 hours. We're going to try and keep to a timeline, and we'll include a presentation with multiple opportunities for you to ask questions about the solid waste management system, as well as the draft guiding principles and goals for the future, which really are the foundation of this step of the solid waste management plan renewal process. To maximize the time available tonight, we'll be following a very short agenda. We'll start with a presentation, followed by the presentation of the principles, the goals, and the next steps in this process. To maximize the time available, questions will be invited through the Q&A function within the webinar. And should we run out of time at the end tonight, we will provide an email at the end of the session for any follow-up questions and comments you might have based on what you've heard. All questions and feedback are recorded and will be reported on within a consultation summary report that we will be preparing on behalf of this entire multi-month process that's been underway since June. And we will be, we hope that after tonight you will, if you haven't already, visit the engagement portal that is available on this project to weigh in on waste. So a few housekeeping items before we start. This is a Zoom webinar format. Your microphone and video are turned off, so nobody can see who's participating or see anything behind you or anything at home tonight. You'll have opportunities, as I said, to pose questions through the Q&A function at various times during the presentation. And should you wish to pose a question and not want others to know your name, please select the anonymous checkbox within the Q&A tool. There's no need for us to know who's posing questions, and so for your own privacy, you may choose to remain anonymous. As the facilitator, I will maintain a speaking order and will be posing your questions to the CSWM team members. Should you have any technical questions at any point about how to use the webinar or any challenges you're having, please use the chat on the bottom of the screen to just let me know how we can help you. With that, before we've sort of started the presentation or the formal part of our evening, we'd love to know who's joined us tonight and where you're from. So Ingrid's going to launch just a short poll, and we'll give you a few moments just to select which community you're joining from, and that gives us a really good sense of the perspectives that people might be bringing, and recognizing that this region is such a large geographic area with a real combination of rural and more urban communities. It's just really helpful to know which communities you're joining us from. So I'll give you a moment to complete that. And Ingrid, when you think that you can see that we've had full participation, then we can share the result.
We'll just give people another couple seconds. Okay, looks like everyone's weighed in.
Great. And so it looks like sort of 30% from Courtney, 30% from Comox, and 40% from Comox Valley Regional District electoral area. So a really good kind of combination of urban and more rural communities. So that's great. Great. Well, thank you very much. I'd now like to welcome Sarah, again, Manager of Solid Waste Planning and Policy Development, to provide an overview of the current solid waste management system and how all of the pieces sort of fit together in providing, a high level of solid waste management across the service area. As I said, if you have any questions, just keep note and then please submit them in the Q&A and I will post them to the team at the end of the presentation. This presentation will take a fair bit of time. There's a lot of sort of information and material to cover, but it's really foundational to the conversation that we're having within this phase of engagement. So get comfortable. Sarah is sort of the master of solid waste, and I've learned so much from her through this process so far, and I'm sure you will too. So I would also encourage you, if you see questions as they come up that you think, yeah, that's actually a really good question that I would like to know more about or hear about, please, you have the option to give it sort of a thumbs up in the Q&A tool. So I please encourage you to do that. That's where diversity of perspective and being in a room with other people with different ideas and different questions, we all benefit from that because it might not be something we may have thought of ourselves. So with that, I will pass it over to Sarah.
Thanks a lot, Katie. So I appreciate everyone for taking the time to join us today. I think Mother Nature was kind and provided a little bit of rain to increase the incentive to sit cozy with a cup of tea this evening. So thanks very much, everyone. And I'm joining you today from the unceded territories of the Comox First Nation. We're here in the office of the CVRD. So there's a lot of acronyms that get thrown around, both in bureaucracy and in government and in this presentation. So I'm going to try and define as many as I can. And let's start with the sort of most frequently used one, and that's CSWM. So that stands for Comox Strathcona Waste Management. So the two regional districts of the Comox Valley and the Strathcona regional districts, we provide waste management services for the entire area that encompasses those two. It was once one regional district and they split up, but the waste service stayed as one. It's a bit unique there in that we are providing that cross-boundary service. And we think there's a lot of benefits to that, as you'll see as we work our way through the PowerPoint today. One of the main functions that we provide, we're kind of highlighting on here, is landfill services. So we provide waste disposal options for all the residents within this community, almost 120,000 residents across this area. And that is, of course, for waste coming from residents, but also from businesses and the industrial and commercial sectors. Beyond landfills, though, we do a lot of work to divert the amount of waste. So we have a number of recycling facilities across the region. For those on the call, it sounds like a lot of us are here from the Comox Valley area. And so we've got the Cumberland facility, which is a waste management center, and that's a full service facility. And then we've got facilities on Hornby and Denman as well, and in Black Creek, Oyster River, where we have a recycling drop-off facility. Further north, you can see we've got facilities in Campbell River, Quadra Cortez, as well as the village of Sayward, and then 3 on the west coast in Zabalas, Tassis, and Gold River. So it's quite a broad service. And some of you may be familiar with some of our private and non-private partners that operate facilities and deliver solid waste services that complement ours. So that's, something like the Bottle Depot here on Puntledge, or the Return It that's up in Campbell River. That would be example of a couple of private bottle depots that operate independently of us. And then we've got wonderful partners in food banks and composting facilities, repair cafes, haulers, that sort of thing. Our main goal as a regional district service here at CSWM is that we want to reduce the amount of waste that's being generated in our community. So Right now, if you can imagine, about 551 kilograms per person, and we're aiming to get down to 350 kilograms per person. It is possible. There's some jurisdictions out there that are achieving great results, and we would like to be able to move that needle. So that's a goal of ours that's put down from the province. And overall, you can see we're managing quite a bit of waste. So it's over 75,000 tons of waste and recycled material, and almost 65,000 tons of that is garbage. So a big tool that we use in order to try and achieve this waste reduction outcome is the Solid Waste Management Plan. So that's SWMP, another acronym for those keeping count. And it's a document that we pull together, and we're thinking big picture. You know, we're pulling together all the different aspects and points within the solid waste system, and we know that they're interconnected, and we know that if we pull a lever over here, it's going to have an impact over there. And we want to make sure that we're making decisions that are wholesome and that are going to benefit the community in the long term. This tool also gives us some powers. You know, we can create bylaws through this tool, and through the consultation process, we can also have funding approved. So if we need to borrow money to achieve our goals, we can approve that funding through here. So it's a very important tool, and it is a regulated tool. And this consultation that we're having today is part of that. So we've done this before. This isn't the first time we've had a solid waste management plan. We have one right now. The last one was updated in 2012. And our first one we completed was back in 1995. And the reason that we keep updating these, we're calling this a renewal. We're talking about it as being like, you know, a renovation of a home rather than like a whole new home. And that's because the industry changes, you know, the people are asking us to do different things, to change the level of service, to provide new services or different services. And so we have to stay current with the times. And that's part of our conversation today. It's a 4-step planning process, and that's outlined by the province, the Ministry of Environment. So we initiate the process in step 1, and we started that back in fall of 2022, almost a year ago now. And then we set the plan direction. That's where we're at right now, with our goals and our guiding principles and review of the existing system and making sure everyone's got a good foundation. And then going forward, next year we'll be evaluating options to achieve the goals and guiding principles that we're going to discuss today. And then we'll develop a draft plan that we'll take out to the community as well, and we'll prepare and look to adopt that plan. So the consultation that we had in step 1 was really successful. We were able to achieve great engagement with the community, with over 1,100 surveys completed about how people felt about the system. And we're on our way now with step 2 here, which we launched in June of this year. Another big piece of step 1 was the advisory committee and the formation of that. So what we wanted to do was ensure that we had representation from that vast area that we saw on the map, and people who are from some of our smaller communities, from our rural areas, as well as from our urban areas, people that bring a diverse background of experience. You know, some of them have been involved in the waste sector, some of them haven't. They're bringing that resident perspective. Some of them have been involved in operating depots. So we did a recruitment as part of that public awareness campaign, and we had a tremendous response with over 50 applications of people willing to put their time forward, and that was wonderful. So we had 15 members of the public that have gone through 5, you know, very time-consuming meetings, and they've really been so generous with their time and with their ideas with us. So we're grateful for that. They're joined as well by local government staff who bring that municipal context, and of course, you know, are also representing the taxpayers in their areas. We invited each of the 10 First Nations that have residents living in a First Nation community within our area. And then as well, just reflecting back on the 1,100 surveys that we completed. So this is just a quick summary of some of the solid waste management in Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service Area. And what we really want to take away from this is just, you know, as I reflect back on starting back in the 1995, era of solid waste management planning and what sort of services people had an expectation for. The focus in there was just on backyard composting, and all the recycling was at drop-off locations. There was no curbside recycling. As we moved into the 2000s, curbside recycling was introduced in the 4 major population centers, and that was in 2008 that the Comox-Strathcona Regional District split and that the CSWM was created. 2010, there was a lot of regulation coming down from the province. A big shift was the landfill criteria were updated, and that created much more stringent requirements for environmental controls on landfills, and was something that we really had to address in our last plan. We also saw a lot of EPR, so that's another acronym there. It's Extended Producer Responsibility. So that's where the programs that you might be familiar with to return the bottles, to be able to drop off your paint or your light bulbs or your electronics, a lot of those programs were launched in that time as a result of provincial regulations. And then internally, we were doing a lot of work with our landfills to respond to the landfill criteria update and working towards organics diversion. And that's been a focus of ours as well through the 2020s. So some key highlights that we have from the 2012 solid waste management plan, just so you can get an idea of, what are the sort of things that we think about or that we might, be contemplating within this process. A big piece for us then was the authorization to borrow $45 million to complete 3 major capital projects. So that was again in response to the changing criteria that were happening with the landfill. We understood that the environmental management of landfills was going to become much more strict. And also we had landfills that were reaching capacity. So we had our Campbell River landfill reaching capacity, and we had a landfill that we call the Pigeon Lake landfill, which is in Cumberland, that was reaching capacity. Both of those were original landfills from, predating 1970. The Pigeon Lake landfill is even much older than that. And they both were reaching capacity, as in we'd filled them right to the top, and we couldn't fill them anymore, couldn't add any more garbage to them. So we spent quite a bit of money, as you can see, developing our new landfill, which is called the Engineered Landfill. If anyone's been out to the landfill here in Cumberland, that's where it's located. And then we also closed the 2 landfills with a cover. So they have cover and they have landfill gas collection. So as the waste decomposes within the landfill, primarily the organic wood biological-based material that's buried in the landfill, as it decomposes, it creates methane gas. And we want to capture that as much as we can. So we've just completed cell 2 of our engineered landfill, and we're now filling that. So that was a big focus of the last plan was, we're reaching the end of life of where we're going to bury our garbage, and we had to make sure through that plan that we were prepared for the future. Some of the other key highlights that came out were organics waste diversion. So we initiated the construction of a regional organics processing facility, and also held a pilot in the town of Comox and Cumberland for some time, since 2013. We expanded the recycling depots in a number of our communities, pretty much every one of them, where we have existing recycling. Some of you may remember as well some of the unstaffed depots. That was a big transition that we went through as we moved away from the unstaffed depots, which we were challenged with contamination and that were much more costly for us to operate, and moved towards depots that met the criteria of Recycle BC, one of the extended producer responsibility programs that affords us more financially viable recycling. We also introduced an illegal dumping bylaw through that plan, and we've been able to engage in a lot of activities in that area with enforcement and pick up that material and to clean up our communities. And we've had an education and promotion program as well that launched. Another big piece was the unified transportation model. So it's not a terribly descriptive name, but we recognized that as we closed landfills in communities that were used to having short distances to haul their waste, they would incur a cost to be having to haul their waste further distances. And we didn't want that to be a disincentive to being able to build a single landfill that has the strictest of environmental controls and financially, that's the most economical way for us to manage our waste with the more stringent requirements from the province. And so as a service, we committed to paying for that transportation from any of the communities for the waste and the recycling to be transported. So that's a way to level the playing field and make sure that no community is paying more just because their landfill was closed. So a big part of talking about waste is talking about money and how it's funded. Our service is certainly not without its cost, but we feel that we're managing the funds responsibly. You can see though that the cost of the service has increased over the years, and a reason for that is really around, again, those provincial regulations and the changes that happened where we used to be able to just find a piece of land that was undesirable, quote unquote undesirable, like a wetland or a quarry that had finished, and start putting garbage in it, and that's not the way that landfills are constructed anymore. So our engineered landfill, it has a liner underneath it. It makes sure to protect the groundwater. We capture all of the water that falls on the garbage, called leachate, and we treat that. All of that costs money. And as well, we're diverting significantly more materials than we were in 2000. So not only are we managing, more garbage because there's more people here, but we're managing more recycling as we pull that recycling out. And we're managing organics in a separate way. And as time has gone on, as a society, we've actually created more waste through increased packaging and at-home deliveries and that sort of thing. So it's as much as we're working towards increasing diversion, it's still material that needs to be managed, even though it's being managed as recycling and not as garbage. And there's a cost associated with that. So I think from this slide, what I really find the takeaway is you can see that inflection point in our tipping fee. So the tipping fee is how much you pay per ton when you come across the scale at the landfill. And that's the tipping fee for municipal solid waste, for regular garbage. And you can see that there was a shift that happened after the last solid waste management plan in 2012. And that was really a recognition that we didn't have the money set aside to be able to meet the requirements that the province set for us. And we had a lot of historical landfills that we needed to manage, and we didn't have a big nest of money set aside that we needed to address that. So that's why we borrowed that 45 million, and also why we steadily increased our tipping fees in order to be able to make sure that we were properly funding the service to meet the requirements of today. So you can see now it's more a combination of tax requisition and tipping fees, and that our tipping fees have stabilized now that we've really got a bit of a handle on it. So how much does this cost you as a taxpayer? It's a question that is often kind of confusing to try and tease out on your tax bill that you might get, once a year with your home. That tax requisition amount that we have is typically around $4 to $5 million in the last few years. And to put that into perspective, if your home was assessed at $250,000, then the cost of your contribution to managing all of these landfills and all of these recycling depots would be about $26. If your home was assessed at around $750,000, then it would be around $78. That's different, of course, from your curbside cost. If you have a curbside service that's administered by your municipality, if you're in a municipality, that's the contribution that you're making to our efforts, which again are focused around recycling depots, organics diversion, and landfilling. So you can see we generate revenue in two other ways. It's not all tax requisition. Our biggest contribution is the tip fees that we collect at the Campbell River and Comox facilities. And as well, we gain some revenue through our recycling. So we gain only about 300,000 from the sale of scrap metal and also through the collection of depot items. So certainly recycling doesn't pay for itself. That might have been something that happened in the 90s, but not anymore. And I sort of touched on, there's a number of complementary local services. So, you know, our big service, the $17 million service that we speak about, CSWM, that's the regional solid waste service, and that's funded by all the residents in the entire area. Everyone contributes at the same rate to that tax requisition amount, and then you know, pays tip fees as the waste comes across the scale. There's also smaller catchment areas, and those are called local service areas, and those are generated in either the Strathcona Regional District or the Comox Valley Regional District, and they're funded just by the residents receiving that service. So an example might be this photo here is the Denman Depot. The residents of Denman contribute to the cost of providing the services at the Denman Depot. Also within municipal boundaries, services like curbside collection are paid separately through your municipal taxes. So the service that you might receive for the pickup of recycling, garbage, and organics at the curb, that's paid directly to the municipality through usually a utility fee. They set a fixed rate, and they manage that for the cost of collection and the cost of disposal. So that's a separate piece that you pay towards the municipality for the collection. And then what you're contributing to the CSWM is the cost to manage that landfill. So they're sort of a little bit difficult to tease out sometimes, but that's the gist of it. All right, so we're going to do what I'm calling a shallow dive into solid waste management today, but I think we're going to overwhelm you with material, and there's a lot to cover, but certainly reflecting on, it might feel like we're going a bit fast, so please do ask questions. But it's a lot of work and a lot of aspects to the work that we do that I want to share with you today. So again, touching on recycling opportunities. So recognizing we've got single family collection in a number of our communities, Cayuga Checklisset First Nation, Clahoose. We've also got Campbell River, Courtney Comox, Cumberland, Cortez, Royston. So there are a number of residents who don't have curbside collection that's organized by a local government, but they may have a private hauler that they subscribe with. And that private hauler comes and picks up the garbage from their curb and brings it to our landfill. And they're paying for both the collection and the disposal through that private hauler fee. And there's a number of businesses as well that pay for those services. And then I think I've mentioned a number of the recycling depots that we have already. And then again, the complementary bottle depots and the number of extended producer responsibility services that we provide at those. So the benefit of the extended producer responsibility programs is there's no fee for you when you bring those materials to drop off. You're paying a fee when you purchase those materials. Either on your receipt, you might see it, or it might be just hidden within the cost. And that money goes to a nonprofit, and then they fund the collection and the processing. It's distinct from your local government. We are part of the system as a collector, but that is sort of an end-of-life management system for those products and packaging that have been developed by the province as a regulation called the recycling regulation. And then in response to that, the private sector, so the manufacturers of all those materials, they organize these programs and set up collection systems. One of the challenges we have is that sometimes we want to see more collection than they're willing to offer. And so as a local government, we're constantly fighting on your behalf through policy initiatives and also, you know, conversations that we're trying to improve accessibility and make sure that you know, our residents can access the drop-off facilities for each of these. And those are determined by the program and not by us, unfortunately. There's also a number of other materials that we divert from waste at some of our locations. So typically at our quote-unquote waste management centers, which are a bit more comprehensive of a facility than just a recycling depot. So scrap metal, wood waste, drywall. Drywall again gets sorted between sort of asbestos potential containing and not new drywall. We've got rubble, we've got sometimes mattresses. You can set those aside depending on how they're being pulled apart. We divert them or we bury them. And then household hazardous waste is an important one as well. That reduces fires and keeps our environment protected. Big aspect of what we're doing is organics diversion. And so we've got, grassroots organics diversion that's happening in communities and in homes. And we support that through some of our education, with backyard composting education being provided annually. As well, we have yard waste drop-off at a number of facilities. And then our municipal partners have historically had yard waste pickup, and the town of Comox and the village of Cumberland helped to launch our pilot for food scraps in 2013. And then, of course, this year that was expanded to include the city of Courtenay and the city of Campbell River. And so the regional organics composting facility and the construction of that facility was a big piece of our last plan. And we were able to secure some funding, some federal funding for the construction of that. So we're now receiving the combined yard waste and food waste at that facility in Campbell River. And it's serving about 50% of the households in our region. We want to get that up to 75% as we move forward. But that facility's been working well, and we're looking forward to, being able to offer expanded services in the future once we've certainly got capacity within the facility. We're just making sure that operationally we're able to operate it in a safe and friendly way to our neighbors. Here's a rainy day in Zeballos. This is emphasis on our waste reduction and education, and we think this is really important, getting out there. It's hard to find ways to get out to the, so that you're not preaching to the choir, but we do try our best. We've got different ways that we reach out to the community in repair cafes. We're going to home shows. We're at all your local community events this summer. Our educator, Lindsay's been attending an event in every community in our area. And then we have our school educator, and she's been working with us for over 5 years now. She just provided her numbers, and I couldn't believe it. It's over 18,000 students that have been engaged since 2018, which is incredible. And she's visited 749 classrooms. So we're really trying to start with the young people and bring those lessons home and teach the parents organically. We also support these initiatives through free stores at some locations, which are supported by volunteers, and the nonprofit reuse tip fee subsidy, where folks like Salvation Army can be able to dispose of some of the waste that comes through their doors, as they're a diversion partner of ours. I mentioned the illegal dumping program before. So, in addition to the bylaw and enforcement, there is also an education piece, and we do community cleanups that are out there. We waive the fees for the disposal for community cleanups. And then we've partnered in the last few years with Ocean Legacy, which is a great initiative to reduce the amount of plastics that are in the marine environment. And we support that through our depot that we host for them at the Cumberland facility. So we've provided some space for them to sort that material so that it can go and be recycled. So as I mentioned, we've got the one main landfill now in Cumberland called the Engineered Landfill. And so we're consolidating and transferring some of that MSW, which is municipal solid waste. It's a technical name for garbage and organics. And so we're bringing the garbage down from Campbell River now. So the landfill there was closed in 2022. And so these are, in this image, you can see a 53-foot tractor trailer, and the garbage is squeezed out, kind of like a tube, and it is deposited in the landfill in Cumberland. We have about 3 to 5 trucks a day that are coming from Campbell River to Cumberland. And then in return, we built a transfer station for organics. And so the organics that are picked up in Comox, Cumberland, and Courtenay are transferred back to Campbell River to the organics facility in those same trucks. So we're able to use the backhaul there to our advantage. In addition to Campbell River, we're also consolidating and moving waste from Cortez Island, Hornby, the Village of Gold River, Sayward, and Strathcona Regional District Area A. So all of the waste from those areas is coming to the landfill here in Cumberland now. The exceptions that you might have picked up on are Tassos Zabalas. They each have a small landfill that receives garbage from their areas, including some of the First Nations. And the Gold River landfill is a bit unique in that we're only landfilling what we call inert waste. So not waste that can smell, just waste like rubble or clean wood, that sort of thing. Hopefully not clean wood, hopefully dirty wood that's been painted or something. And then the rest of the waste is coming here. There are some private landfills, we don't want to exclude them, but they're not permitted to accept the waste from a household. They're only permitted to accept waste from construction, demolition, that type of waste. So we really are the most important asset when it comes to being able to dispose of the waste that's being generated in homes. Just gonna grab a sip. Taking this stunning photo. I don't know if it's coming across because I'm fighting a bit of a cold, so my enthusiasm is maybe not as high as it usually is. But I love garbage and I love our landfill. I think it's beautiful. And this is a beautiful photograph of it. Oh, apologies. So in the background here, this is our Pigeon Lake landfill. That's our old landfill. And then we've got our new cell. This is cell 2. So we've started to fill this up. You can see the liner and the drainage. So we collect all of the water that falls on the garbage. This is a pile of garbage here. You can barely even tell. The water that falls on the garbage gets picked up by the pipes that are underneath. And then it comes over to our leachate treatment plant over here, where it goes to the pond first, but that's an aside. It goes to this lined pond into our treatment plant, gets processed and treated, and then gets returned to the groundwater table over here, kind of like a septic system. So that's a huge difference from the landfill that historically, the Pigeon Lake landfill, there is no liner underneath. So we're not able to capture the water that flows through that landfill. But what we did do when we closed it was we covered it with plastic and then covered it with dirt and grass. And so now the rainfall that's falling on that landfill is no longer able to reach the garbage. So it's slowly drying out. So we've got a large facility. Most of you are coming in through the public area on the left here. It's 307 acres now, and this is property that we own. A number of our facilities are Crown leases, but this particular property is private, and we do own it. It was initially used for the coal operations that are in this area, for those familiar. So it was used for coal waste as far back as the mid-1800s. And there was a spur line, a rail spur line that used to come from Cumberland. So, this is an area with a long history of waste management. The village of Cumberland took it over in sort of the 60s and 70s, and then the regional district took over operations officially in 2012. We took over ownership of the land. So it's definitely got a number of different decades of waste that have been deposited here over the years, but things are filling up a lot faster now that we've consolidated the waste, and also because of our incredible population growth. We see a lot more customers than we used to. This particular facility, as well as our Campbell River facility, have scales, and so we're really able to track that information really well. It's all connected to our computer systems. And just in the last 5 years, we've seen an increase in users from 2017 to 2012 of over 34 and 55%, which is incredible. That's a lot more people coming to use our facilities, which is great, but it does put a bit of a strain on staff. You'll see later, but we're receiving almost 65,000 tons of waste at this facility now each year. And these two cells that you can see here, we call them cells, but cell 2 and cell 1, they'll get us through to about 2037. And then there's a third cell that we can build that we're permitted for. But it's going to go pretty quickly. You can see already, we filled that hole. This was started to fill in 2018, 2019, and we've already put quite a bit of waste in there. So we're looking at extending the height of the landfill and using as much of that height as we can. We call it airspace. And we're also, wanting to make sure that this facility is going to be lasting the community for a long time. So we'll be considering whether 3 cells is the appropriate amount or whether we need more. All right. So pretty. So just quickly want to touch on that permit. So it's issued by the BC Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. We last updated it in 2016 to get those cells 1, 2, and 3 recognized. And we've actually submitted an amendment, and that's being reviewed by the ministry now. And that was submitted last year. That's how long these things take. And we want to increase the amount of tonnage that we can receive from 65 to 80,000 tons. And we also want to adjust the amount of leachate, which is that water that's touched the garbage, and increase our ability to manage the wet winters and the drier summers and be able to sort of equalize our processing flows. And we added a new pond as well. So as I mentioned, we've got sort of cells 1, 2, and 3, and right now they're permitted to 185 meters, which would get us up to here. Feasibly, we could fill as high as 212 or 205 for just cells 1, 2, and 3. And so this is additional waste that could be placed without any more cost to building those liners. So that would definitely help to recover some of the cost of constructing and operating these facilities. So that's something that we're looking at as well is, you know, can we expand the height? Do we need to expand the width? So that's a consideration here. If we stick with cell 3, then it certainly would be full faster. If we were to play this out entirely, cell 5 would be full in 2074, just to give you some time scale there. We work really hard to conserve that airspace as much as we can. The staff there do an incredible job of compacting the waste and, you know, minimizing the amount of soil that we use. So I've mentioned it before, but responsible waste management, that's the big difference in how we're doing. We've got a world-class facility. We really do. It's pretty cool. When I talk to my colleagues in other communities, you know, they certainly see that. So we're protecting the groundwater, we're gathering that leachate up, we're treating it. We've got monitoring wells around all of our sites, and those are tested and sampled 2 to 4 times a year. And that's not just kind of Comox, but also our remote sites. And we also do landfill gas capture. So I mentioned that landfill gas that's created through the breakdown and the decomposition of the organic materials. We put wells, they're like straws, into the landfill, into the garbage, and we suck on that gas with a vacuum system, and we bring it back to our flare, and we're able to burn that gas off and reduce the greenhouse gas impact by doing that at our landfills in Cumberland, and we're working on that as well in Campbell River. And then a big piece of that too is just reducing the amount of organic waste that we're sending there. So, you know, there's a benefit to us investing in that organics facility for both airspace, but also for greenhouse gases. So I mentioned that Campbell River landfill. You know, there's ongoing costs to monitoring and managing these landfills, you know, each year, but there's also, you know, once we've closed a landfill, it doesn't just go away. The monitoring requirements continue for at least 30 years. So we have to continue to sample, we have to continue to operate landfill gas systems. We have to make sure that the cover is remaining intact, you know, that there's no erosion or that sort of thing. You know, that's a cost that continues beyond the life of a closed landfill. And that's something that we're planning better for in the future than we have in the past. But for example, you know, just Campbell River, it's a $4.5 million liability now that it's closed, and that has to be funded by the waste that's coming in the future, but also, you know, it should be funded by the waste that was put there in the past, which is almost, you know, 2.7 million cubic meters of waste there. So that's a lesson that we learned through our last process. So less organic waste, less methane. Is methane from landfills a problem? It's certainly a significant contributor. So 23% of Canada's methane emissions are coming from municipal landfills. And, you know, 95% of the greenhouse gases in our service are coming from those landfills. So we've worked hard and we've reduced the amount by collecting the gas and flaring it off. But we also want to try and explore opportunities for doing something better with the gas than just burning it. So to give you an idea of some of the other contributions, just because we get questions from people like, well, you're driving these trucks around, sure, you know, that's creating all kinds of greenhouse gases, and definitely driving trucks creates greenhouse gases, but it really does pale in comparison to the amount of greenhouse gases that are generated from our landfills and from that waste that is in the landfills and is being emitted. So, you know, this big blue line, this is the Campbell River emissions. We're just in the process of installing the landfill gas collection system there. And once we do, we expect these emissions to be reduced by at least half based on our experience in Cumberland. But we've got, you know, even more waste in Cumberland, and we've got continued waste that's being deposited in Cumberland. So even though we are collecting landfill gas, there's some emissions that we're not able to capture. Because the moment that waste goes in, you know, it starts to decompose, and we can't always grab those gases right away. It takes us a bit of time to be able to put the wells in, and we need to be able to operate. You know, we can't operate under a literal bubble. So some of those emissions escape. Burning the gas does create some emissions, but again, that's like 25 to 28 times less emissions than if we released it. So it's certainly a big benefit to the environment. And then you can see there's tiny little slices, you know, here and here that are from some of our trucking, from our consolidation and the operations of our facilities, but very, very small amounts. And I know this is kind of a big, obscure number, but this is tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So you take all the emissions from the different types of greenhouse gases and you put them into a single unit so that it's easier to compare. So that's what tons of carbon dioxide equivalent is referring to. And if you want to try and put that into like driving a car, just as an example, the US EPA says that, you know, a typical passenger vehicle driving around 18,000 kilometers a year would emit 4.5 tons of carbon a year. So it's a lot of cars, you know, represents a lot of emissions. We're doing pretty well compared to our colleagues. We're kind of middle of the pack, but we do want to improve. So our BC average is around 500 kilograms waste generated per person per year. We're at around 518, 511, depends on the year. And the target again is 350. So, you know, there's places like Nanaimo and Capital Regional District, Sunshine Coast, they're able to achieve greater diversion rates. And we're hoping to be able to follow their paths. Another objective that we had from the Solid Waste Management Plan in 2012 was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we've mentioned a number of ways that we've been doing that. So you can see here, this is one of those straws that are being put in the garbage, and then we'll backfill it and then start sipping on it. And we're definitely making gains there, but we would like to use the gas beneficially. So we're in discussion, you know, to be able to convert that gas into renewable natural gas. And that would be awesome. Right now, we're using some of that gas to heat up our leachate in the winter months. So we are able to use about 5 to 8% of it in our boilers to heat the gas up. But we'd like to see, you know, 100% of that gas used beneficially. And we're exploring that for Campbell River as well. But it's more difficult in a closed landfill than it is in a landfill that's still receiving waste. Another objective that we have is that environmentally responsible and compliant residual waste management. It's a lot of words to say, like, make sure you're handling your waste well. And so we've got, you know, our environmental monitoring, we've got leachate capture happening now. We've closed our 2 biggest landfills that are historic. And then going forward, we're looking at closing the landfills in Tassus, Sabalas, and Gold River, again, to reduce that liability and protect the environment, and also to provide, you know, good service to each of those communities. There's a few things to consider as we plan for the future. You know, as I mentioned, our focus is often, we talk a lot about Campbell River and Cumberland, and you can see that, you know, that's really where the bulk of our waste is being generated. So we definitely do spend time, considering and working with our partners in our remote communities. But their waste generation rates are much smaller, so our ability to affect change and to reduce tonnages is not as large as it is in our urban dense communities. And then in addition to that 64,000 tons that was put in there in 2020, we also want to acknowledge that there was about 12,000 tons of soil and construction and demolition waste that was deposited in private landfills. Those are mostly located in Campbell River. We've got a growing population. Everyone's heard about that. We've witnessed it. We've seen it. And that means more waste. And not just because there's more people, but also, there's a lot of renovations that have been happening. People have come over with money and they've bought a house that's maybe a little bit dated from the 90s or something, and they're doing renos, and that's creating waste. Maybe they're doing a tear down instead of doing a house move, and that's creating waste. Or maybe we're having to remove houses to build multifamily housing in order to increase density, and that's creating waste. So that's something that we're having to address here. And is it a big part of our waste? Is that construction waste a factor? And it is. So in 2017, we hired a company to dig through our garbage. If you can believe that somebody gets paid to do that, it's a real thing. Yeah. So they open up the garbage bags and they go, what's inside? And they have like 100 different bins, and they pop all that garbage into all the different bins, and they categorize it and they weigh it. It's quite an endeavor. And what they found when they did that by tearing apart our garbage here in the CSWM is that, a big part, almost 25%, even more than 25% of that was organics that could go into the organic stream. So food waste was a big part, 20%. Less yard waste, because there's already curbside yard waste in the major municipalities, but food waste was one that we could address. So we've kind of checked that box, and we're working again more to be able to offer that and make it accessible to multifamily homes and also to rural residents and to IC&I, to businesses. But the other two big pieces of this pie are construction and renovation materials at 24%. And then, recyclable packaging and paper. And that is primarily, due to a lack of accessibility or convenience. And a big factor for that is multifamily and construction and businesses that aren't able to have the same opportunities for recycling as residents are. So that's an area that we want to focus on to try and, again, reduce the amount of waste that's divertible that's going into our garbage. So those are kind of two of the big pieces that we've got left. Construction, demolition, multifamily, and IC&I. So that stands for institutional, commercial, and industrial waste. And we want to be able to focus on some of those sectors as we move forward. There's also some big shifts happening outside of just the CSWM. Provincially and federally, there's some real initiatives. They're going to be creating programs for mattresses and propane canisters and lithium batteries so that we can manage those more cost effectively through provincial programs like some of the other electronics and hazardous materials. There's also a single-use plastic reduction initiative, both federally and provincially, that are being rolled out in December. And you'll see that in your communities as things like takeout containers and plastic bags become less prevalent. There's new landfill methane regulations coming out federally. That's going to increase the costs that we have in order to make sure that we're meeting those regulations. There's forever chemicals, PFAS, that are being studied right now, both sides of the border, and we're learning a lot about those and how to manage those safely in our environment. There's changes to the organic matter recycling regulation, and those changes will affect our organics facility and could potentially require capital investments. We've tried to make as many as we can, anticipating what that regulation will look like, but it's not finalized yet. And then the federal government's finally looking at labeling for recycling and compostability, and they're trying to ease that and make it simpler. So climate change, disaster response needs, that's certainly been in the news a lot, and that impacts us both from a transportation, but also it creates waste. You know, if there's a large earthquake or a flood, it creates significant amount of waste in those events, wildfires as well. So there's a lot to consider. Thank you for your time. That was a crazy amount of information. As I say, it was hours and hours that we spent with the advisory group going through all this, and I appreciate that I was able to capture your attention for the last hour. And I hope that you have some questions. So please fire away in the Q&A there.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. It really is so much to unpack, and there's so much for you in terms of planning and management, but also just for residents and businesses to consider when we think about our own responsibility in terms of waste reduction and prevention. So we do have a question in the Q&A, and please, while these questions are being answered, please feel free to add more. I won't interrupt Sarah or Vivian in their response to the question at hand, but I'm sure there was a lot sort of covered there that might have sort of piqued your interest or might have been like a surprise to you that maybe begged a question. So feel free to pose that in the Q&A. You'll see the Q&A, it is at the very bottom of the screen, just right of center. And you can just type in your question, and then Sarah and Vivian will answer verbally and live. Siskel and Ebert's 2 thumbs up, a couple of comments, Sarah, just feedback on the presentation. So gratitude to you for sharing as much as you did and in such a comprehensive way. The one question we have right now is Comox will be moving from picking up unlimited weekly household yard waste and organics to only 360 liters per week. Wanting to know, is this due to a lack of transport capacity to Campbell River, or is it a local Comox government decision? And I know Vivian would be happy to answer this question. So maybe I'll pose it to Vivian, and then we'll come back, Sarah, if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Todd, for the question. And again, this is a very exciting program that the town of Comox and the city of Courtenay are endeavoring in the new year, recognizing that there are some changes that are coming forward, one of which is the transition from the unlimited yard waste or organics to a 360 liter per week, which is causing some concerns among some residents, but it is for a good reason. Over the past couple years, especially in the last since COVID, there's been excessive yard waste that's being generated, and this has been a significant contributing factor to a lot of the service disruption that we were seeing, especially last summer in the residential curbside collection program in both these communities, and also up in Campbell River as well. So by providing this 360 liter limit, which is the biggest cart that's available that's compatible with the curbside program, this will mean that there is going to be an actual maximum quantity of material that's going to be collected, and the collection staff will actually be able to actually manage this material per their scheduled route, so that they're not overwhelmed on any given collection day. Secondly, there is a cost that's going to be associated with processing of this organics. As Sarah, I think, put up a really pretty picture up in one of her slides. The processing of this organic isn't free. It's at a cost of $110 per ton. So as local governments, town of Comox, the city of Courtenay, they do need to be able to budget so that they can. So by limiting each of these household contributions, they can ensure that these costs are to each resident, each household is equitable across the different municipalities.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Vivian. Sarah, anything you wanted to add, or are you good?
I think just like operationally, the garbage kind of goes like this when you look from month to month, and the recycling kind of goes like this when you look from month to month. And the yard waste kind of goes like this. And it has these big peaks in the spring and the fall. And that's, it's very difficult for the operations to anticipate week to week how much is going to be there. And certainly, you know, they can add extra trucks and add extra folks, but that's something that's difficult to do as a proactive means. You know, they don't just have extra trucks sitting around. So I think that's sort of that other piece, is that it really allows the operations, which are contracted to Emterra, to be able to have, you know, a steady staff contingent and a fleet of vehicles that meets that needs. They can anticipate how much waste is being picked up. So we do understand that it creates challenges in those peak times for people in the spring and the fall. And we're hopeful that the community, the business community, is going to respond and, you know, provide options for people that may not have a truck to drive excess yard waste up to the landfill, and offer them, you know, a pickup service at a reasonable rate for maybe some of that excess landfill. So those options certainly exist now, but there may be more developed through as a response to that limit.
So I guess just a quick follow-up to that, Sarah, then if folks are generating more than what is currently the max, they should contact their municipality then for additional options, or give them that back?
Yeah, it looks like it's something they're considering, is adding, having the option for people to have a second yard waste cart. So that's something you can reach out to your municipality about, to see if that's something they're considering, and maybe we'll provide some links as a follow-up to this to folks if they're not sure where to look for that. But if you do have the means, you can bring any yard waste that's excess either to our facility in Cumberland or in Campbell River, or we also have some private composting facilities in the community that will accept that material. And there is a fee associated with drop-off for both private or public facilities, but that's one other way to manage that excess.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going back and forth here between the Q&A and the chat, so not everyone can see necessarily the questions that may have come through in the chat. But the next question is, why is glass not recyclable?
Yeah, so there's kind of two streams of glass, maybe three. There's the glass that is a pickle jar. There's the glass that is a drinking glass. And then there's glass that might be windows, for example. So the pickle jar glass is considered packaging, and it's captured under the Recycle BC program for packaging. So glass is not accepted at the curb because we have single stream collection here. So everything goes into one bin. If our municipalities wanted to collect glass at the curb, it would have to be collected completely separately. So there would be an increase in the cost of your curbside service. And that's because when the glass breaks, it gets mixed up with paper in the curbside stream, and it can contaminate the paper stream for recycling. And it can also be a hazard to the workers that are sorting on the sorting lines. So it is recyclable if it's brought to the depot in our communities. So we have glass packaging that's accepted at all of our Recycle BC depots. And then for a glass, that one's garbage. There's not a lot of those being generated. And then window glass, again, that's garbage right now. You know, we might look in the future to consider pane glass as a stream. But it is being recycled, just needs to be in the depot so that it can be managed safely.
Great, thank you. The next question coming from the chat is also somewhat similar, but sort of what happens to styrofoam?
Yeah, styrofoam's a really tricky material to manage. Because it is so lightweight, it blows around, it's really difficult. It doesn't compact. You know, you try and crush it and it just bursts into pieces. So they have to melt it and heat it in order to get it to compact if you do want to compact it. But generally what's happening to our styrofoam is we collect it in these like massive plastic bags, and then it gets picked up in a 40-yard bin. So it's like 40 feet by 8 feet by 8 feet. So we pile up this bin, and then it still only weighs like a couple 100 kilograms. Like it weighs nothing. Styrofoam is literally air. And it gets trucked to a facility in the Lower Mainland where it is heated and extruded. And then because it is a nice clean product, they're able to recycle it and make things like crown molding and picture frames and stuff. So it does get recycled, but it is centralized in Lower Mainland, and yeah, we gotta haul it around before that.
Great, thank you. The next question I have is a little bit of feedback, Sarah. Wonderful presentation, a lot of information to cover. The question being, will the compost being generated be bagged and sold or sold to farmers?
Vivian, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can take this. Thank you so much for the question, Joyce. It is a great question. The compost that's being processed up in the Campbell River facility we're working through that process right now. We're looking to apportion most of that to the farmers so that we can direct sell to those folks in larger quantities, potentially making a smaller portion of it available to individuals that are wanting to come by and to pick up to pick it up in smaller quantities. There will likely be a minimum quantity requirement just so that we can manage the amount of traffic that's coming through the site. But we're working through that process right now. And as soon as we have that agreement solidified, we'll have that information up on our website as well. If you're if you're joining us from the Comox Valley, I do want to note that we do have Skyrocket that's available at our biosolids facility at which is on the same property as our landfill as well. So that material is also available to be sold individually to residents.
Great, thank you, Vivian. Related question to compost, actually. If you compost at home, can your taxes be reduced by the approximate $75 per annual cost?
For that question, I'm going to have to defer this one to the municipal office, or sorry, the municipal partner that's offering the curbside service. They manage the curbside contracts and they administer the fee associated with your curbside service. So as Sarah mentioned, we'll provide the links to the corresponding municipality so that you can reach out and get those answers directly from them.
That's great. Thanks, Vivian. And actually, the last question in our Q&A is a similar one to, when we have overcapacity, like excess yard waste, like all the autumn leaves, I think that, again, would be forwarded to the local municipality for what options would be available. So we will be sure to include those links in a follow-up email to everyone who's registered for this session tonight. And I'm just going to check the chat here. I think that the last question is, I think probably along the similar vein, but just to confirm, why is the 120-liter garbage going to be picked up only bi-weekly rather than weekly? There is a concern that decomposing waste will attract rodents and other pests to residential areas. So I'll just flip that back to you, Vivian, but I believe that may also be a question for local government partners.
Yeah, I can briefly answer that, but the idea behind the biweekly pickup is to really drive some behavioral change within our community. As Sarah mentioned earlier, with that beautiful picture of the landfill, it's a very valuable asset in our community, and we really do need to work to preserve that valuable airspace and really putting in material in there that truly belongs, can't go elsewhere. So in terms of the decomposing waste that you're talking about, that's really the organics, the yard waste component that we're really hoping to be able to drive that volume of waste to the organics waste stream that is picked up on a weekly basis. So I think Sarah had put forward a slide of the composition of waste. So if we're really taking a look at the true waste that's actually going into the garbage, roughly about 30% of that is compostable waste that decomposes, as you mentioned. That's the attractant to the rodents and other pests, and that stuff is picked up on a weekly basis, leaving more of the volume for just the true garbage that will eventually end up at the landfill. And that's a decision that the town of Comox and I believe the city of Courtenay has arrived at for the upcoming transition to automated service.
Great, thank you. And the last question in the Q&A, before we move on to sort of the draft guiding principles and the draft goals, where we'll also follow a similar format. So if you have questions about what's being considered, please advance your questions a similar way. The last question here related to the presentation tonight, though, is will you be able to accept biodegradable or compostable bags?
Yeah, I'm glad that got asked, actually. It sort of touched on it briefly in the sort of future scenarios, but those terms, biodegradable and compostable, are kind of unregulated terms right now. And that's part of the challenge. So our process, while it could compost true compostable bags, sometimes things that are labeled as compostable are not actually compostable. And also, you know, it's very difficult once a bag, plastic, compostable or otherwise, is in the organic stream for us to know the difference. It's just a truckload of waste. And so if it isn't compostable, it becomes a contaminant, and we have very strict requirements about contamination within the organics and the compost that we'll be creating. And so at this time, you know, it's best practice to not accept compostable or biodegradable labeled bags. And that's something that the federal government is working on, is creating terms and standards that companies would have to meet in order to use those terms. So potentially in the future, things could change, but for now, it's best practice so that we can create a really quality compost product for us to not accept those.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I don't have any additional questions posed at this time, so I'm going to suggest we move into the draft guiding principles and provide an overview of what's currently being considered as part of step 2 and this consultation process. And then we're going to pose the opportunity to ask additional questions. Some of these questions that have come up may be somewhat related to those principles and goals. So feel free to pose as we go. And again, I'll just keep track and don't worry about interrupting, but I don't want you to lose your thought as it comes to you. So feel free to pose those questions. So we'll just jump in here. Vivian, we'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie. We'll dive right into the goals and guiding principles. Let me just pull this up. Sorry. Are you guys able to all see my screen?
We are, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so diving right into this. So the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy has established a provincial solid waste management targets that we all need to follow as regional districts, and they have put forward the performance measures that we are all it should strive to achieve. And these provincial performance measures are outlined here in the slide. The per capita disposal rate is targeted for 460 kilograms per year with a longer term goal of 350. We're currently at the 550 mark, so we have a bit of a ways to go. In regards to the organics disposal, access to organics waste disposal, the goal for the province is at 80%. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, we're only currently at about 50%. So we still, again, have some work to do there to provide more accessibility to organics disposal within our service area. And through different initiatives, things like working through with alignment with our regional strategic planning process, the corporate energy and emissions plan, our sustainability strategy, and our regional growth strategies. There's a number of ways that we can start to work towards these goals to reduce our municipal solid waste, so our garbage, through the renewal of our solid waste management plan, as we're doing covering off today, as well as promoting organics recycling and diversion of materials. As well as other waste prevention strategies through education, as well as continuous improvement and expansion of our EPR programs. As Sarah mentioned in a previous slide, there is a initiative right now through the provincial and federal government to phase out single-use plastics. These are actionable actions that local governments can take to support the removal of these very harmful materials from our waste stream. And again, regional targets are things that we need to strive to work towards. And these are basically our SMART goals, the specific, measurable, actionable, time-bound goals that we need to work towards to be able to demonstrate that we're making continuous improvements towards these initiatives or these targets. Next slide. So before we get into, before we get into the guiding principles and goals, I just wanted to dive really quickly here and get into a couple of the key terms that we'll be covering off. The graphic on the left that you're seeing is what we call the 5R pollution prevention hierarchy, and that's the reduce, reuse, recover, recycle, recover, and then lastly, residual management. And this is a tool that the provincial government has provided local governments to use when we're looking at opportunities to improve our solid waste management practices. And we are really required to look in order of these preference based on this pollution prevention hierarchy at one level at a time, where one level can only be undertaken when all other feasible opportunities for pollution prevention at a higher level have already been undertaken. And the idea here is that we adhere to the highest level of performance under the pollution prevention hierarchy to encourage innovation, investment by the industry to improve things like product design, to reduce waste, and then with residual management being the really truly the last option before all the other options have been exhausted. But I do want to turn your attention to the graphic on the right, and this is something that we're going to be referencing in our guiding principles. We did kind of blow it up, and because the advisory committee has taken a look at this hierarchy, and there are more R's that we do need to look at before we even look at residual management. So really looking at refusal of materials. So do we actually need this? Rethinking our waste management strategy approach, the redesigned, again, looking at product packaging so that we can eliminate the waste, and then the reduction, reuse, repair, and the recycling. So there's a lot of other R's that we need to consider, which will be dealt with as we go into the guiding principles. The second terminology that I do want to bring forward is the notion of circular economy. It's a cool buzzword, but it is something that we do want to incorporate into our guiding principles, as there are many benefits to transitioning to a circular economy. Most notably, the potential to manage materials sustainably and really promoting that longer term environmental and economic sustainability within our service area. Some of the really key benefits is prioritizing the efficient use of these resources by reducing the waste and reusing materials. We can really optimize our resource consumption and thereby reducing our environmental impact. And this approach also aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by reducing the amount, minimizing the need for resource extractions, manufacturing, and transportation. And all of this really aligns with the CSWM's goals to combat climate change and also to contribute to our local sustainability goals. So diving into the guiding principles here, the renewal of the solid waste management plan that we're undertaking right now will serve to as a well-defined roadmap for our CSWM service to strive towards working towards those goals that we had mentioned in a couple slides earlier. And this is to the benefit of both businesses and residents in our CSWM jurisdiction here. So there's going to be 8 fundamental guiding principles that's been put forward by the province. And this is really intended to serve as the foundation of our regional district. And when we're renewing our solid waste management plan, the province has also encouraged us to take a look, and in addition to these guiding principles, either we amend them or incorporate additional guiding principles that are specifically tailored to our local needs and circumstance for consideration here. So diving into each of these 8 principles, I do want to keep the following in mind for you guys. The guiding principles are really the fundamental beliefs or the values that underpin our entire approach to solid waste management here in the Valley, or here in the CSWM. Guiding principles are also used to help shape the overall direction and provide that framework for our plan. So they're going to be really used to guide our strategies, our policies, and our actions. They are broad and kind of the overarching focus on sustainability, responsibility, and our ethical considerations and how we manage waste. And they really do reflect our region's values and aspirations towards waste management. So our advisory has put a lot of thought into this, and in terms of the wording and how we, again, this is going to be used to guide the rest of the plan. So I do want to present each of these with one by one here for you guys. Oh, sorry. Oh, geez. Sorry, what's going on? Okay, you're gonna have to see both the first 2 together because I don't know how to go back. So the first guiding principle here is the promotion. Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna read them out to you. Promote and support zero waste approaches and support a circular economy. The second principle. Oh, sorry. Let me just explain this one here. So this first one here is again really to encourage a shift in the thinking of waste as a residual, requiring disposal, to waste as a resource that can be utilized in a closed loop system. So what we talked about in the circular economy slide. So with the zero waste approach, we're really aiming to minimize waste generation and enabling the sustainable use and reuse of products and materials. So at the local level here, as a CSWM service, we're really looking to remove barriers and encourage those opportunities to help contribute towards establishment of a local circular economy. The guiding principle number 2, it is the promotion of the 7 R's. So that's that hierarchy that we talked about earlier. So promoting the 7 R's, the refuse, rethink, redesign, reduce, repair, reuse, and recycle. Really, these are elevating the importance of the waste prevention by prioritizing and programming the provision for services for these higher R's before we consider the actual residual management. Yay, okay. Guiding principle number 3, maximizing the beneficial and best use of waste materials and managing residual waste appropriately. So this here, it's really looking to technology, best practices, infrastructure investments that should continue to develop and recover any remaining materials and energy from waste streams to manage for residuals and to manage residuals for disposals appropriately. So this one here, the advisor really dove into quite a bit of time in formulating this one here. We do want to, again, make sure that we are taking the material and putting it to its best possible use. And again, referencing the hierarchy that we spoke to in principle number 2, so that we're getting the best, extracting the best use of those resources before we look to the actual residual management. Guiding principle number 4, this is so support polluter and user pay approaches and manage incentives to maximize behavior outcomes. This one here is really around the producer and user responsibility for the management of products to be supported through the provisions of market-based incentives, disposal restrictions, as well as zoning to support collection facilities, and the support of reuse and remanufacturing businesses. This is also to address the education and behavior change strategies that's required to be aimed at customers and businesses to help foster further waste reduction, reuse, and recycling. Principle number 5, prevent organics and recyclables from going into the garbage. This is, as we talked about earlier, organics makes up roughly about 30% of the black bag that's currently going into the garbage, along with recyclables, which make up another roughly about 20%, I believe. So these are materials that can be removed from our waste stream, again, so that we're leaving that valuable airspace for true garbage. Moving to number 6. Collaborate with other regional districts, municipalities, First Nations, service providers, institutions, and associations, both public and private. This here is really just centered around the collaboration of many aspects of solid waste management and to support the most effective and efficient overall municipal solid waste system, and leveraging the best practices that we see from other municipalities and all of our partners that we work with, to make sure that we're adhering to best practices. Guiding principle number 7, this is to build and support collaborative partnerships to achieve regional targets set in the plans. This one here is really strengthening those partnerships with interested parties to achieve our regional targets. All of our waste and recycling sectors, service providers, associations, environmental organizations, everybody that generates waste and has an interest in waste will be involved in building this solid waste system. And it's going to take a collaborative effort on from all of us to optimize successful outcomes. And lastly here, guiding principle number 8, this is to strive for equity within the region for private and public solid waste management facilities to achieve or exceed regional targets set in our solid waste management plan. So these are facilities within our service area that's going to be subject to similar requirements, so that again, we're all playing on the same level playing field. And with that, sorry. So it's really important from us to hear from all of you at this juncture about your thoughts on what we just presented on the draft guiding principles. And as we noted earlier, the guiding principles and the goals will help determine what those specific strategies and programs might be considered in the future. So it's really important that we get this foundation right. So now we will invite you to invite your questions about these guiding principles that we just presented, and I will put them back up because I'm pretty sure nobody has a photographic memory. So here you go. I'll turn it back over to you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you, Vivian. Yeah, and great job with the animation. Tougher than it looks, or tougher than you think it's going to be. We have one question that just came in just as you were starting your presentation. So it's less specific to the principles themselves, but it was wondering if there's a pictograph or chart on what should go in a garbage bag. Can tissues and paper towels be recycled, or should they go into recycling or composting? So it's sort of like that big question of like what goes where. And Ingrid let me know that there are some links available related to that question specifically. So we'll put those in the follow-up email that goes out to all of you tomorrow. So that should give you the answers to those questions, or at least a good start. One question is, grocery stores like Costco tend to overpackage. Are you working with them to reduce packaging?
I can answer that question. Yeah, certainly big organizations like that, they do have resources at the national level. And they're part of, you know, some larger conversations that are happening around the circularity of plastic and being able to contribute in ways like if a company like Costco commits to using 50% recycled content in all of their plastic packaging, that could make a tremendous difference in driving up the the price of recycled plastic and making it more profitable to recycle plastic. So that they're definitely aware of these conversations. At the local level, it's difficult for a store to make changes. So we contribute to those conversations sort of from a policy national perspective. And that's where we think that a company like Costco can be leveraged. It is a challenge for sure. And there's another way to, you know, with food waste, if you're overbuying at Costco because it's a good price, but then, you know, you only eat 2 out of the 3 cucumbers and the third one goes bad. That can also be another way that they're sort of contributing to the challenge. So yeah, they're a big partner, and I think that they have the right sentiments, but acknowledge that there is some over packaging that can happen with toilet paper inside toilet paper packaging, as an example that always frustrates me.
Good, thank you, Sarah. This is a question as much as it might be a comment, but I think it sort of speaks to process and in terms of where we are in this 4-step planning process. At this stage, should you not have objectives that are actionable?
Yeah, I like that comment. I know it is really aspirational at this stage, and I've had conversations with our educator that's been in communities all summer long, you know, trying to get people to talk about these. And we've equated it to sort of the brand, you know, trying to get them to eat their brand, because they are really important, that the aspirations and the direction is solid, and the actionables come next. So I can appreciate it does feel like a bit of a slow grind, but it's such a broad area geographically for us to make sure that we've reached out to everyone with these and that they're all on board. Action is going to come. Don't worry. Next summer is going to be sort of step 3, where we're really going to talk about options and make sure that costs are available to people so they can understand the implications of achieving all of these things and how to achieve them. But in the background, you know, we continue to operations, and we continue to progress and respond to elected officials. So yeah, if there's something that you really want to see movement on, that we're not hitting pause entirely. Things are still happening in the background, but this is a long process to make sure that we do have the time to consult with the residents of our broad area. So yeah, thank you though for that question.
Thank you. Another great question suggestion. Will there be education session on how people can start businesses that help to reduce, fix, upcycle items that should not go into the waste, so everyone does best practices?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I know there's a lot of resources out there for holding repair cafes, but I haven't considered whether there are resources out there for someone who wants to start a business to support that kind of initiative. So yeah, if that person wants to get a hold of us, our contact information will be at the end of the presentation, and we can maybe have a conversation about that and try and connect them with some folks in the community that are already working in that space and see if there's some synergies.
Great. That is it for questions so far at this point, based on what folks have heard. Vivian, would you like to carry on and walk us through the draft goals? And again, keep the questions coming.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just wanted to go back to the one question around, sorry, there's just been a lot of questions as to like where some things, whether they should be going into the recycling bin or whether or not they should go to the depot. I do just want to mention that there are Recollect, it's called the Recollect app that's available to a community residents within the municipalities. And CSWM will be launching our own this fall, and this will have a what goes where tool, whereby you can type in any product, whether it's tissue paper or paper towels or whatever you're interested in, and it will spit out an answer for you as to where that material can be either recycled, either at your curbside, at the depot, or alternate locations, or ultimately in the garbage if there aren't other options. So I just wanted to put that out there because it seems to be a bit of a trend. So these are resources that are currently at your fingertips if you look it up on your so for Courtney, I think it's Courtney Recycles. Town of Comox has one as well. I can't remember what theirs is called, but we'll have all the links in the follow-up email. Sorry, I'm going on a diatribe here. So I will get on to my next slide if I can get this to work. Okay, here we go. To one of the questions earlier, goals again we're moving towards the more specific, measurable objectives of our solid waste management plan. I know that there's a lot of questions as to what the difference between guiding principles and the goals are. So these are really the practical targets that we're going to reflect the desired outcome of this plan. These goals are to be clear and actionable targets for specifically to our waste reduction efforts, our recycling and our waste diversion initiatives, and other aspects of our solid waste management service here. And they serve as benchmark to measure the success of our program. These goals are much more focused and operational than the broad and overarching guiding principles that we just presented earlier. The goals that we are going to present here in the next slide, they're intended to accomplish, to really lay out what is to be accomplished and by when. So similar to the guiding principle exercise that we just did, the goals again, needs to be developed with extensive input from our advisory committee, which they've spent a lot of time honing in on the wording and through the public consultation process as we're doing now. And ultimately, they need to support the provincial targets that we noted earlier. All right, technology, this is not my forte, but here we go. All right, goal number 1, to support the regional circular economy approaches and to work towards the goal of zero waste. Goal number 2 is to reduce and remediate any environmental impacts from our solid waste management activities. Goal number 3, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to pursue beneficial use of landfill gas. Goal number 4, to responsibly manage waste and to minimize the amount of residual waste in the landfill. Goal number 5, to have informed residents, businesses, and community partners empowered to participate effectively and consistently in proper waste management practices, to use CSWM enforcement powers when necessary. And lastly, goal number 6, to ensure that the CSWM solid waste service are financially sustainable and delivered equitably across the region, recognizing and leveraging the unique challenges and cultures of our rural and remote communities. Having gone through the draft goals here now, we'll take a moment again and ask for any questions or feedback that you have on these draft goals that the advisory committee has presented. And I'll turn it back over to you, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess the one other note I would make is that we are just 20 minutes shy of our end time for this evening. So this is the last opportunity to pose any questions or comments you may have at this point. So we welcome your feedback and questions related to the goals or any remaining questions that you may have.
Should have had some of that waiting music, you know.
Yeah.
Final Jeopardy moment, folks.
Well, it looks like you've covered a lot of ground and a lot of specific questions that have come in related to all sorts of different topics. And so I think that's really great. It's really generated, I think, some thinking and a great opportunity to be able to ask questions to you. One comment, guiding principles and goals should be a fait accompli by now. Now what? I don't know if that's more of a comment or a question, but Sarah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that sort of earlier comment about action. And I appreciate that. It is a challenge, but you know, there's a measurement of consultation, a benchmark that we have to achieve. And we have to make sure that we've given people an opportunity, because there are costs associated with trying to achieve these goals. And if we move too quickly without making sure that people have had a chance to absorb them and commit to them, we can kind of get ahead of ourselves. So certainly I'd just say, follow, go to our Engage page, and make sure to sign up for updates, so that as these next steps, these actionable, the doing pieces come into play, and the pieces that are a little more tangible, you'll be sure to be made aware, as new engagement and consultation opportunities come up as we continue down this path. So yeah, connect on our Engage page and follow our Facebook and feeds for CSWM, and you'll be in the know.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. Next question. What are the ideas around best practices for a yard? Is xeriscape preferred, self-composting, more meadowed areas, less grass, perennials, not annuals?
Best practices for a yard. I mean, I'm not one to speak. I've got an overly enthusiastic yard. And it brings me a lot of joy, and it brings me a lot of meditation. So if your outcomes are around, water use, that might be different. If your outcome is around how much time you want to spend out there, that might be different. There's definitely a lot of things that you can take into consideration and can almost paralyze you into doing nothing. So I'd say do what works for you. And certainly composting in your yard is going to be really beneficial if that's something that you want to undertake. Some people don't, whether it's the ick factor or the effort, or they just find that they're in an area where it causes too many attractants. That's really up to the individual. So I know that was kind of a non-answer. I'm sorry, but I just want you to not feel bad and not be paralyzed. And if you take any initiatives, I applaud them.
Thank you, Sarah. The next question, one is a comment. Thank you for a great presentation. Vivian, are there strategies to inform residents?
Yeah, a big part of our next phase of the plan is really around education. And as Sarah had mentioned before, Lindsay Easton, our community educator, is one of the great tool that we have within our service to really get that outreach to the community, and to provide that education to residents and businesses. We do have a school educator as well, Tina. She's amazing. She's been with us for the last 4 years. This is her 5th year, and she's been working every school, every classroom, trying to get that message to our the younger generation, so that we can have that organically grow in our community. So the next phase of our the actionable item or actionable strategies that Sarah talked about, we are really going to dive a bit more into that in terms of how we're going to get that community outreach to encourage that behavioral change. So stay tuned. Please do continue to engage with us through thank you so much, Ingrid, for putting that up. It's www.engagecomoxvalley.ca SWMP. So we'll have a lot more information on our website as to what the next phases are. But there are a lot of information on our website, and we encourage you to take a look there as well for resources.
Yeah, and I think I'd emphasize too, for those that might not be aware, for this particular step and phase of the consultation, um, we have taken considerable efforts to get out to the community by investing in radio ads and newspaper ads, as well as social media, and that in-person engagement that we've done in each of the communities. So we've definitely tried to be shouting from the rooftops, and we kicked this phase off as well with an in-person event at the landfill where we hosted 140 plus people on a tour of the landfill, and that was the first time we'd done that. So that was a really successful event. So yeah, there's ways that we've been trying to inform the community throughout this process too, in case that question was kind of leaning that way.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I was actually just going to make sure that you mentioned how positive the feedback was that was received from that landfill event. It just made it so, having been there and being able to be involved in that, how tangible that conversation was when you're standing in the middle of the landfill and talking about all of the things we're talking about tonight. And so I understand that was the first of hopefully future events similar to that. One last comment in the Q&A, Sarah, is thank you so much. Excellent presentation, and 2 thumbs up yet again. Just to kind of close off the evening, and you may leave here with more questions and comments, and you may get home and talk to a partner, a friend, your kids, and it may generate more thoughts. We do really hope that over the next couple of weeks, you will encourage people to participate in this process. This process is open until September 25th, Monday the 25th. And when the engagement opportunities sort of close, that's one of our takeaways from this process, is that we produce a What We Heard consultation summary report this fall, and that's shared with the Regional Advisory Committee, the board. It'll be posted on the website. It's really important that folks who participate in these types of conversations have the opportunity to see where their information and input has gone and how that information will then be used going forward. And as Sarah has very clearly outlined, this 4-step process is sequential, and it builds upon consultation in each and every phase. And so what was heard in step 1 and step 2 will then inform recommendations and further technical analysis for step 3. And next slide, please, Vivian. There we go. And so, sorry. Oh, that's okay. One more. Yeah. So just to, oh, you got a touchy mouse tonight. Just to revisit the 4-step planning process. So step 1, initiating the process, that's been completed. We're in the midst of plan step 2.
Oh my gosh, sorry. I just been fired from this job here. It's coming back up. My apologies. This is the Jeopardy music. Sorry, it's loading back up.
No worries. No worries.
Okay.
See your mouse. I think there's a slight delay on your computer, so.
It is coming back up. It was going so well till I took over. Slideshow, current slide. Okay, is it back up?
Yeah, it's there. Great.
Okay.
And so at the conclusion of the second phase of setting the plan direction, as Sarah indicated, we then move into evaluation of options and more sort of tangible or specifics in terms of some of the comments that we've heard tonight, and then prepare an adoption of the draft plan and a formal consultation process around that. And I think the other piece that's important to note is that this is a very specific 4-step process that is outlined by the province for all regional districts to follow. And so some of the comments tonight around the goals and the guiding principles and how we kind of build upon them, that's a very common comment that we hear when we do this work across the province. And so again, just following that sort of very specific stepped process for how we get to a final plan. And in closing, the next slide, Vivian. Thank you. We just want to thank everyone for taking the time tonight and for being taking such a strong interest in this topic. And hopefully you'll leave here with new information, new ideas, and thoughts about your role and individual responsibility, as well as collectively as a community, what we need to do to manage our solid waste going forward, and hopefully a real understanding of how times are changing and how our communities change. We must also adapt what we do within our programs and technically and operationally for the next 10 years. So on the screen, you'll just see there is a project email that, should you want to send feedback or a question specifically, it goes straight to Sarah, actually, and I know she would be happy to hear from you. There's also an in-person open house. So if you feel like this just wasn't enough and you have more questions or ideas, or you think someone you know might be interested, please encourage them. It's next Tuesday night from 5 to 8 in Campbell River at the Maritime Heritage Center. And again, obviously this is a multi-year process. So if you'd like to receive updates on the project or complete the survey, we have the web link on the screen. And our commitment to you leaving here tonight is that we will share with you follow-up links and information so that you can share that with others, or just as a reminder to yourself to go online and provide additional feedback. So thank you on behalf of the entire panel and everyone here tonight. Really, really appreciate your involvement and engagement in this process, and we hope that you'll continue to stay involved going forward. And with that, I'll just pass it over to Sarah and Vivian if you have any last words that you'd like to share.
Yeah, thanks so much for sticking with us, guys. And yeah, there's no new information at the drop-in open house, so don't feel like you'll be missing out if you don't attend. You got the platinum version here. So thank you guys all very much for your time.
Yes, thank you for sharing your Tuesday evening with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'll be ending the webinar now. Good evening.